Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's session. And in today's session, we'll be doing a deep dive on UiPath apps. So in particular, we'll focus around orchestrator APIs. So we'll take you through on how you can trigger a particular process using an API, how you can start your job remotely using an API, how you can get, for example, if you need to get your folder, if you need to get your queue directly using API. So in this case, it will be an interaction between orchestrator APIs as well as Postman. So it will be purely around the same. Okay. So the main, at the tail end, we expect that you'll be able to have a brief understanding around UiPath apps. You'll be able to know why and when are they important. We'll touch a bit around integration services. So integration services is more of, I can call it citizen developer API framework, a bit around the same. So what they have done is that they have combined the most common APIs into integration services. And it also gives you the ability to build your own API. You can be able to create your own API. We'll touch base around the same. Then we'll now do the deep dive around APIs, how you can authenticate, how you can get, like I mentioned, how you can get the folder by name, how you can start an actual process, and how you can, for example, configure your queues and your assets. So I'll just, for the sake of time, I'll just dive deeper. So today being the last session, Zakariah would be the key lead. Receive greetings from Christina. They are having another engagement. That's the reason she was not able to attend this one, but receive her greetings. And yes, that's me, Jonathan. I'll be supporting Zakariah. So if you have any questions, clarifications, you can leave them on chat. I'll try as much as possible to answer them as we proceed, or we'll take them at the tail end. So in this juncture, I'll welcome Zakariah. Zakariah.
Yes, Jonathan. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and good evening or good afternoon in this case. So today, as we have said, we'll be looking at UiPath APIs and basically how they offer the flexibility and how they enhance seamless automation. And in this case, it's by a combination of UI, this being user interface, and APIs to kind of form that seamless integration. So as we know, the maximization of the benefits of the processes or the robot in this case is the key goal. And in terms of user interfaces, if you look at it, they are very important in automation processes, and they offer the flexibility in terms of automating processes from simple to even complex. So this being the user interactions. So they also help in capturing the full scope of automation or potential business automation processes. So when we bring together user interfaces and APIs, that's why you find that we can be able to maximize the benefits of UiPath. So an API offers very key functionalities in this case. One being offering a high scale in terms of data extraction. You can be able to do this using APIs, doing large-scale data transfers or even data updates. APIs also offer key functionalities in terms of complementing the IT or the existing IT strategies. So this is what we're going to look at today. And we want to know why specifically UiPath APIs. And first, these APIs go beyond the traditional APIs that most of us here might know. By using these API integrations that are built within UiPath, you'll see that it's a different kind of scenario from the kind of traditional APIs that we know. So secondly, these APIs, they offer seamless bidirectional and event-driven capabilities. And as you can see, its API to application, you can see there is that direction or event-driven capability that is being offered. Maybe document to API, that kind of seamless integrations between when maybe you want to extract data from documents and update somewhere by use of an API. You can also see UI robot to API, attended to unattended robots, human. These are all use cases that we can use. Thirdly, not to forget the ability to support any combination across API integrations, in this case, the integration pattern. So let's look at one of the key areas that UiPath have developed, and this is the UiPath integration services. So most of us have heard of connectors, and some of us call them add-ins. So this is what this is about. And UiPath have created a rich catalog of connectors, and that can be integrated within robots that are built within the various enterprise systems. So you can see we have examples of these add-ins integrations that have been created. You can see we have Outlook, we have Jira, we have QuickBooks, we have integrations with GitHub, and so on and so forth. So let's look at it deeper. The how to build your own API, the connector builder. So in terms of the connector builder feature for integration service allows you to build your own custom connector on top of an API technology to be able to integrate with any application that you want. So when you create and publish a connector, I'll show you this within the orchestrator. When you create and publish this connector to your tenant, it becomes available to be used. Use the clause or the automations that are within your actual tenant. Yeah. So there is that visibility. So the question what is answered by that they offer customization based on that on those third-party APIs. Why? In terms of its usability, close the automations with the tenant. So when also we can answer that by having, by understanding that there is general availability whenever needed across the existing tenant. So I'm just going to go into and show us the connector builder. Just allow me to get into my orchestrator. So this is my local orchestrator. So I'm just going to head to the integration service. So when you come here on the integration service, you'll be able to see the connectors in this case. So this is the catalog that I was talking about. You can see we have a lot of connectors that have been built, or add-ins in this case. You can see we have Gmail, the ones that you can utilize to connect these to your robots. You have Google Docs, and so far, so much more. We also have things like Outlook. If you can just search 365 connection. These are all connectors that have been built. So this is the basis of what we are going to look at today. So when we talk about the connector builder, it's loading. So you can be able to create your own connector. For example, I want to create my own connector. You can see you have two options. One is start from an API definition, where you have created maybe your Postman collection, or maybe you have your own Swagger file. So here is where you can just start from an API definition. You also have the option to start from a blank connector. So if I go deeper into, for example, if I want to start from an API definition, I can just click browse here. And then I'll just select maybe something that I have, a collection that I have, Postman collections, and then maybe that, and then open. And then you can see the collection is there. So if I press continue, I can be able to set up my own connector in this case. You see the connector name is there, the description, the icon if you want to add it, and then you can actually create. Yeah. So here you just feed in the base and everything that you need in order to create your own base connector. So that's it about the base connector, or the connector builder in this case. And this forms the basis of what we're about to look at. So for example, as you have said, you can create from your own API collection. So let's go deeper and see in this dive session and see how we can be able to create actual endpoints to be able to trigger our processes, to create assets, or maybe even to actually create assets or manipulate all those things. So I'm just going to go directly to Postman. I've created a sample here. So this is the collection I've created for today's session. So as I've said, the UiPath add-ins or connectors in this case use the orchestrator APIs. So these are the APIs that you're going to see today. And this enables the inbound automation from other applications to UiPath. So these add-ins can trigger certain actions automatically, such as maybe creating a queue or creating queue items, starting jobs. This is all based on the external applications that you're using. And this eliminates the need to actually monitor processes continually. And it allows the robots to actually react to changes in a near real time. So for example, I can give an example. You want to create a process that onboards a customer into a core application. So if the customer is buying a product, for example, from a portal, we can be able to send that information directly through an API from the portal. And first of all is to authenticate, then proceed to actually adding that information to the queue. And if you're familiar with the triggers, you know we have two types of triggers. We have time triggers and we have queue triggers as the most common ones. So if your robot has been set as a queue trigger, then once it receives this information, then it starts the onboarding process from that point. So how do they really work, these add-ins? When enabling the inbound automation, for example, from an external or a separate environment to the UiPath orchestrator, the connector first establishes an authentication, or it establishes a connection to one or more of your orchestrator tenants. So when I talk about the tenants, I'll just go on just showing you. Let me just go back here. So if I go to preferences, you can see that in my case, I only have one tenant, and it's the default tenant in this case. So if you have different tenants, this is the connection or the authentication occurs as per the available or the specific tenant that has been specified. So the key advantages actually of these add-ins, as I had mentioned, is that offering of high availability, HA. Having or being able to provide that seamless integration with the orchestrator from those external applications, this is key. And also, number two being the high consistency that it offers, being able to trigger these jobs with the correct parameters. So why build an add-in or a connector in this case? It's to be able to give or to stay connected to UiPath resources from outside or from an external application that you have created. So let's just go back to my Postman, and then we start. So where do we start in this case? We start by setting up our environment. So as you can see, this is how I've set up my environment. So, but there are some key things that we are going to need. So for example, we are going to need the tenant ID, my organization tenant ID, and secret key. So how can we get this? So I'm just going to go back to, yes, my orchestrator. And you can see, once I click the icon here and I click preferences, Yes, and then I click privacy and security, I can be able to view the API access. And when I view the API access, I can be able to get the user key, the organization ID, the tenant name, and also the client ID that you can use to actually do the testing for these APIs. So these are very important. So you can see you can also revoke access. For example, if you note that a certain API is being misused, you can be able to revoke access just by just clicking revoke access in this case. So I'm just going back to and showing you the environment. So I've created two environments. So the most important environment here is the UiPath APIs environment, as you can see there. So we have the auth client ID. This is derived actually from the external application that you want to integrate. You also have the client secret also can be achieved or can be set from the external application that you want to actually integrate with. The most important here, the first one is cloud URL. So this is just a constant link. That is cloud.uipath.com that you're going to use in this case. You also have the cloud tenant. As you've seen in this case, if I view here, you can see that the tenant name, my tenant name is default tenant. And we can also see the organization ID. So I've just copy pasted this and have just added them to my environment as variables so that I can reuse them over and over. You can also see you have the UiPath organization unit ID. I shall show you how we get this. We also have the crowd token URL. So this is just an endpoint that is used to authenticate your actual the request or the authentication request. So this is the crowd organization here. You'll see it here. Let me just show it. So you can be able to see it here. The organization ID is what I've called the crowd organization here as the variables. So these are the things that you're going to use the setting up of the environment. So let me just go back to my collection and start on the first one. So the first instance of how you can be able to access the resources within UiPath is actually authentication. So you must, when sending API calls to the orchestrator, you need to be authenticated. Of course, in this case, we use a BRA token. How then can we retrieve this token? This is what I'm about to show you. So remember, I had shown you the endpoint that I'm going to use. In this case, it's the crowd token URL. I've stored it in that variable. So you can see the actual URL there is just an endpoint which you hit with this payload. So the payload contains the grant type, which is a constantly refresh token. Then you have the client ID, and you also have the refresh token. So you can see the client ID, I pulled it from here. So you have the client ID here, and then you have the refresh token, which we have used the user key in this case. So I've just copied this and just added them here on our payload. So once I hit this endpoint, I'm expecting it to authenticate or to give me an authentication token, in this case, being a bearer token. So you'll see that in my environment here, my environment, UiPath API environment, I have a variable that I've called the token. So in which I've assigned a token that I have retrieved from hitting this endpoint and getting this token. So this is the access token, and it has the ID there. So that's the first step, the authentication step. So if we go further, let me just go to the next part where I get the folders. So in terms of, just to mention, if, for example, there are some tokens or there are some requests that can be made to UiPath or the server in this case to actually, for example, getting a queue item or adding a queue item, you might need to use things like the folder ID, the tenant ID. So that's why I put this request here. So you'll see that we'll be retrieving elements or some specific details to be used in the subsequent request. So in UiPath, for example, in this case, we're going to do a get folders. We want to get folders that are the list of folders that are in my orchestrator. So you'll see that for those who might not be understanding, the folder in this case, what we call in UiPath, the folder is just like a storage area that actually helps organization keep their projects separate and maintain a kind of a fine-grained control over automation. So just to show you on my orchestrator here, I'm just going to go to the orchestrator. So this is the orchestrator. So this is actually the folders that I'm talking about. We have one that is always there by default, the shared folder. We also have this one that I've created. And under it, I've created a subfolder called Africa Series 2 Demo. So this is, the folders allow us to kind of control or organize our projects. So our automations or our demos today will be based on these modern folders that we are using today. So as I had said, the reason as to why we want to get folders information is because some API calls consume resources from a folder. And this will require the folder name to be passed within the header of that specific API call. So this is important that we get the folders information. For example, if you want to add a queue item, you will require to add the folder ID as the header of this API call. So if, for example, an API expects a folder to be specified and one is not specified within the header, you are usually likely to get a HTTP error code that is 400. And it will tell you that the message will be an organization unit ID is required for that particular action. So it is important to get the folders information. Sometimes you also need, or it is recommended that the connector or the admin in this case must validate the entered fully qualified name, as you'll see. So just to demonstrate this before I even go on further. So we have these get folders, as you can see there. So this is the endpoint that you're going to hit. We have the parameters here. We want to use a filter of Africa Series 2 demo. And if, for example, I was to remove, for example, if a folder doesn't exist in this case. So you've seen our endpoint is a composition of the cloud URL, in this case, the variable, and also the organization, cloud organization, and also the cloud tenant name, so which is the default tenant in this case. So I'm just going to hit these endpoints so that you can see. So I've hit the endpoints, but we can see that the value here is blank. So you can see that the value in this case is blank. And the count of the folders with this particular filtering criteria is 0. So this means that we don't have any folder that is named Africa Series 2 Demo. But for example, we are sure that we have Africa Series 2 Demo. So let's hit this. So it still says we don't have this. So we just go and confirm the name of our folder. So the name of our folder is still the same, Africa Series 2 Demo. Let's see. So it's still the same. So this is getting the folders, just a second. Confirm. Okay. So I see where the problem is. The problem is we are using the environment that we're using is different. So we need to pass the environment that is the correct one. So in this case, the environment that I was supposed to be using is UiPath APIs environment. So if I pass this, you can see that we have a 200, status 200, with actually the count of the folders that are within that specific orchestrator folder, modern folder. So you can see that we have a count of 1, and this is very important. Kindly note this key, the key to that folder, it's the release key in this case. So we have the description of that whole folder. We have the folder type standard, the provision type automatic, fine grained, we have is active, yes, is true, p type is processes, and also we have something very important, is the folder ID, as you can see there. So that's how you actually get the folders. So for example, in this case, let me just add another folder here. So I'm just going to create a subfolder in this case, demo3, just for the sake of the presentation. And then it's there. So I want to hit the endpoint again. So if I hit it, so you'll see it's still extracting the same folder, because you can see we have not, we are actually getting it by the name in this case. So it's still getting one, that the filtering criteria is there, that the display name in this case must be equivalent to the Africa Series 2 demo folder. So that's it about the getting of folders. Please note, that's how we get actually the folder ID in this case. So if you go to the next one, just before I forget, for all these API calls, we must pass in the token. The token is the bearer token, must be of type bearer in this case. So, and remember, we got our token from the authentication. This is the token that we are speaking about. And if we view on our environment, you'll see that I assigned this, I gave the value of this token to that value that I received from that authentication API call. So let's go back and let's go to the next one. The next one is get process details. So what are the most important things about getting this, for us to get the process details? So the process details in this case will allow us to maybe use the information that we get in this case to use it to maybe start that particular process. So in this case, again, of importance is authentication. So it means that this means that this API call has been authenticated. So I passed in the token as a variable there, and then we have to look at them. We're still, just a second. Yes, exactly. So we have also to specify the filtering criteria in this case. So in our orchestrator, we'll see that we have a process that has been named Africa Series 2 Demo Ref Dem. Africa Series 2 Ref Dem. So this is what we have passed as the filtering criteria in this case. So you'll see that the name must be equivalent to that. And then we also have to set up the headers. Yeah. So these are the headers being used. And then we have to, it's just that. So once we hit this, we expect to get the actual details that are of this process. So I'm just going to send an API call, and you can see that the processes with that particular criteria is 1, the count is 1. We also have the details here. We have the key, a release key. We also have the process key. This is just actually the name. We also have the process version. It gives you all the details that pertains to that particular process. I also have the input that was put, and then we also have the process status, the robot size, all this information that you can be able to utilize. So that's how we get the actual details of the process. So how do we start a process? So we start a process by first, let's check the payload. We have the payload. First of all, we must have the endpoint, which pertains or contains the cloud URL. We have the cloud organization. We have the cloud tenant. Remember, we defined this in our environment. So we are going to hit this endpoint, but also pass this payload. Yeah. So this payload is constant. So we have the different parts of this payload. So the ID we actually got from the previous step. Yeah. We are going to use it as the release key. So for example, let's go back here to the process details. You see, we have this key here, and we have its value. So this is the key that we want to use. We want to specify, or it needs to, the orchestrator needs this key to be able to run the specific version of this process. So you're going to use this. So if you check here on our start process, you'll see that I have pasted that particular key that I've gotten from the get process details API call. You also have the strategy, which is always recommended for modern folder. It is always recommended for you to use the modern jobs count. So we also have the job counts. The job counts this particularly means how often do you want this job to be executed? In this case, I want it to be executed once. So we also have input parameters there. So this is in the case of, for example, if your job has input parameters, they can be sent through this JSON string. And in that field, input arguments, if it does not, this field is always ignored. Like, for example, in our case, the demo that I'm going to show us today will not have any input parameters. So we just want to start it. So the other important part of this API call to start a process is the headers. We have to check on the headers. So within the headers, we have to pass the content type as application and JSON. We also have to specify the actual organization unit ID. So the organization unit ID, let me get back here. So you can see here, we have the value as 4727 656. So if you go back to our API call on getting the folder, this is actually where we get that value, the organization, the actual organization ID. So this is the ID that we use in that case. So that's why I said it's important for you to note this information. You have to make this call for you to get the actual ID so that you can use it in the subsequent calls. So in this case, you can see the actually organization unit ID resembling the actual folder ID that the process is in. So this is why I've passed it here. So those are the key important things about starting a process endpoint. So this endpoint, I'm going to hit the endpoint. I'm expecting it to actually return, let me just hit it. So you can see the message that it returns is that it could not find a machine. This is because I don't have any runtimes on my actual community cloud environment. So I'm just going to show you a better example. I'm going to use this one. So this one I've just created. It's just exactly the same. But in this case, I've used an actual process in an environment that we can be able to see. So again, the payload, as you can see, as I've said, and then we also have the bearer token. You must pass that. We also have passed the content type and also specify the unit ID in this case. So I'm just going to hit this and then just show you, just to confirm that my environment or where I want to demo is, yes. So you can see, we will see it here. You'll be able to see a process with the name here, ADFSCBot start running once I hit the endpoint. So this is the actual endpoint, just confirming everything is okay. And then I send the API. So it says the job associated with this process could not be found. This is because, again, the environment, I have to specify the environment that I'm using because the the variables in this case are different. So I want to send the API call again, and you can see a job has been created. So if you go back and see, you can be able to see that we have started a process from Postman. In this case, we have pushed a certain payload that contains information to start this particular process. And you can see it started 9 seconds ago. So this is how we actually start a process from an external application. So for example, you need to start a process from a portal or from something that triggers, that you want to trigger that particular process to begin, that maybe has input arguments. So you just use this API and you first authenticate, of course, using the bearer tokens, you hit the endpoint, and you proceed to actually having that process running. So that's how you start a process. Let's go to another critical component, that is the add queue items. I'm just going to go back to my environment. Exactly, now we have it. So when we talk about adding queue items, we talk about maybe you have an external application that you need it to run, or for example, collect information or extract data and actually pass it to your robot for the bot to process. So how do you make sure that you are able to add this information to a queue for a robot to process? So this is what we are talking about here. So we still, in this case, let's explore this API call, you'll see that we have a crowd URL again, and the organization and the tenant, and also we have this particular payload. So this payload has different, actually has, you see, like, for example, has different details. So let's explore these details and know what each of them means. So when we talk about, let's start with the most important one, in this case being the name. So you can see that I have specified the name as attendance details queue. In this case, in our previous demonstration, I showed you guys how to do actually the reframework. So you can be able to see that we have our queue here. It's called attendance details queue. So this field, within this field, is where you actually specify the name of the queue that you want to pass this information to. So the type of the queue is a dynamic list in this case. And then we have the priority. In the priority, we have 3 different actual, it's a list, it's a static list. It contains, it can either be low, it can be normal, or it can be even high. This is actually the priority to be applied on that specific queue item. We also have the deferred date. In this case, it's just, I've just put 2021, but actually we're supposed to pass a string with the date of the earliest date and time at which this particular queue item is available for processing. If, for example, we pass an empty here, the item can be processed as soon as possible. And the data type in this case, again, I must reiterate, is date time. And then we have also the due date in this case. Here is the due date. So the due date is actually the latest time at which it's the latest date and time at which a particular item should be processed. Again, if it is passed as empty, then you can see it can be processed at any given time. We can say that, because if you pass that it doesn't have a due date, then it means it can be processed anytime that is there. So we also have things like I'm just going to go into the reference in this case. So a reference is a string reference that is identifying a particular queue item in this case. So it's a text, is of type text. When we talk about the specific content in this case is a JSON object. So you can see in this case we have the type of data within the name field, put it as a string, mandatory, a string. So I've passed the name, John Gunia, and I've also passed an email, jg@gmail.com, and then number of events attended. So if you're familiar with our previous demo, we were generating certificates for the attendees in this case. So if I want, I'm just going to change this so that we can see. If you want to add a queue item into this queue, let me just put John Doe. And then I'm just going to change the reference to probably attendee to 82. And then the email there, and then the number of events attended, just change it a bit to 8. So if I pick these endpoints, yeah, you'll see that you'll see a status of 201 created. This means that a queue item has been created, and you'll be able to see the actual output, the queue definition ID. How is it being identified? You'll see the retry number in this case wasn't set, so it's 0. So you'll see all this information pertaining to that queue item that you have pushed to your queue. So let's just confirm that we have received this on this other end. So this is the queue. So view the transactions. Yeah, we'll see that we have the reference here, 82. This was 81, 81. I'm just going to filter by new, and then so that we can have this. So this one was passed earlier. So this is 82. If you view the details, you'll see that the specific data, the object that we passed, the JSON object that we passed, you can be able to see it here. It has the name, it has the email, and it also has the number of events attended by this particular person, and we can be able to confirm that this is the actual information that we passed with our API call. So that's just it about this. So if you look at it, we have each queue item being identified by its own particular ID. So let's get to getting a queue item by ID. So this is what I was speaking about. If we have added this queue, we should be able to check the ID. So if you can see the ID here. So we want to have an API call that actually retrieves this queue item from the queue. So we have the add queue items. Let's just go to there, and then we have the parameters. We want to pass the particular queue item ID, and I want us to retrieve it. So you can see we get a 200 OK status in this case with the information or with the queue item in this case. If you look at the specific content, this one, you can be able to see this JSON object contains the name, the John Doe that we passed. It also contains the email and the number of events attended. So that's how you actually retrieve a queue item from a queue. So if we wanted to get all queues, how do we go about that? Remember, always for all these calls, we have to authorize, and we also have, in this case, we are passing in the tenant name. In this case, our tenant name is the default tenant as we had defined it. We also have to pass the folder ID or the organization unit ID, which is 472656 in this case, as the header. And this API call actually gets you all the queues that are there within that particular folder. So if we hit it, you'll see that we have a count of 1. Yeah. So the count of 1 and the value, we can be able to get the details of that particular queue that is there. We only have one queue. So we have the name. The name is attendance details queue, as we had shown. Also the description. Yeah. We put a description. I put a description when I was creating this queue, and I said that the queue contains all the information that is for all the attendants of the Africa Series 2 virtual event. So we also have max number of retries, the 1 there, and we have all this, even the creation time, as we can see. We also have the risk SLA, the release ID, And also specifically, also the queue has a specific ID in this case. So that's how we retrieve information about a particular queue. So let's see, how do we now create an asset? So in terms of creating an asset, we know what assets are generally. So I'm just going to show you. So let's get here. Seems to have logged me out. Let me just log back, then log in. Yeah, and you're back in. So when I speak about assets, it's when you want to store some specific values that are or that pertains to your specific process. So in this case, for example, if you want to store, let me just navigate to the assets. So you can see I have two assets. Yeah. So the number one, we have an email. Yeah. It's of the type text, and what I've stored is an email in this case. So if I was to use this email within my process, I'll just get the asset and process it or use it within the process. So I also have another asset called Gmail login. It's of credential type. How now can we create this using API calls? So if you go back here, we have this endpoint, and again we have passed the URL, the organization, and the cloud tenant in this case. So we want to create, for example, let me just change because this is existing. Want to change and maybe do a URL asset. And then I want it to have a scope of global to be used across all the folders. Then the value type, I don't want, you can either use text, you can use a bool, you can use a credential, and so on and so forth. So what I want to provide here, a value of, let me say, just put a link of, that's even just a link, so I can just use that. So I want to create this asset called URL. So remember authorization. Remember, you also have to pass the unit ID, which is the folder ID that you retrieve from the get folder ID, the get folder API call. So if I send this, you can see that 201 created is the status. And when we go back to our orchestrator, you can be able to see that you've been able to create this asset, and you can be able to utilize it on the rest of the process or within your actual process or robots. So you can also get all the assets that are of a particular folder. So in this case, you actually pass in the organization unit ID, the folder ID, and you just using this API call, you just send. So you'll see that you'll get a count of 3. You have 3 assets, and you also have all the details. You can also, lastly, we can also get an asset by name. For example, we created a certain asset. In this case, we created it and named it URL. So I'm just going to confirm the name. The name is URL. So you want to actually get the asset like that, and then send. So you'll see that you can be able to see to get an asset by name. So this is just an overview of what UiPath APIs can help you to do. UiPath Orchestrator APIs. There are so many of them. Maybe I can just show you. So if you want to if you want to actually access, if you want to access your the Swagger file, there is a link to that. I'll paste it in the chat of how you can actually replace. I'll give you an endpoint in which you can actually replace this and get all the API calls. There are so many API calls that pertains to the Orchestrator API. So just going back to my presentation now as I finish. So I believe that is all from Orchestrator APIs, and I believe that gives you a foundation of what you can be able to do or how you can be able to connect Orchestrator, the actual robot, the process that you have, to external applications, web applications, any application that is out there. So that's it from my end. I'll give room for questions. And yes, back to you, Jonathan.
Okay, thank you so much, Zakariah. Any question for Zakariah? I think as if there's any question, you can leave in chat. But I think just to reiterate, the opportunities or purely the opportunities are limited in terms of using the APIs. Look at it, for example, you're working with a team. Let's say you have, there's another team that is developing a website, or there's another team that is coming up with a solution, and they want to do validation, or they want to do, yes, let's use a basic example. They want to do validation. So once a customer fills some basic information, let's say they fill their ID, so immediately the customer clicks send. When they click send, it triggers a queue item in your orchestrator. Then assuming you have created your process whereby from the queue item is supposed to trigger the actual bot to start a process. So that bot can go back end and it can validate that ID number of that particular customer, then send back that response to that portal. So from the portal, customer is just seeing that he entered his or her ID number. Then backend, you've been able to populate their age, their full names, if the ID is valid, you can be able to get all those particular details, let's say from government portals or from KRA. That's a basic example of how you can be able to utilize the same case, assuming the customer has filled all information from your website and he or she clicks submit, rather than having that information fail over to a manual user, you can have that information flow to your API, and from your API, you can trigger exactly what Zakariah showed us. You can trigger that start job. So rather than onboarding that customer manually, you can have that bot take all that particular information, go to your different core systems and onboard that particular customer. In same case, once you're finished onboarding, you can have your bot right back to your website. So it gives you unlimited possibilities around the same. I'm not sure if there's any questions. Thank you, Zach. I can see he has also shared the additional Swagger links. I had shared for Postman. So the opportunities are endless. Like he also mentioned as we start, we also do have the integration services, which is released from UiPath. So what that does is that for most common, I can call them APIs, or for most common used APIs specifically, they are able to, they have already integrated, they have already done the authorization backend. So they just give you that, I can call it, they just give you, they put it out there for you. So the only thing maybe you need to do is to just connect, activate that particular connection. In same case, you can be able to trigger your bot, you can be able to trigger a process purely from that integration service. So I think for most common ones, if you're using Jira, if you're using Outlook, you can be able to do that using the actual integration services. So I'm not sure if you still have any question or require clarification, do not hesitate to reach out to Zakariah or myself. We'll be able to just guide. So as of now, we have come to the end of the actual series. So ideally, we are still contemplating on which particular series to take up moving forward. So just first stop recording. So if you feel there is specific, how will I say, if you feel there's specific requests